What's up YouTube, KS Gun Guy here. Thanks for joining me today as always. So I'm excited to bring a long-awaited and requested If I Could Only Have One to you guys. Now, as a reminder, with the If I Could Only Have One series, we take a look at two guns, whether very similar or in some cases very different. We take a look at the specs, we take a look at the features, I'll be wheeling and shooting along the way, we'll take a look at the triggers, and at the end there will be a winner. Now, of course, as always, both of these guns are fantastic. Now, I own both of these guns. I love them both, but sometimes it's really fun to take a step back and challenge myself and perhaps challenge you to say, if you could only have one, what would it be and why? So that brings us to today, and again, we've got the CZ Shadow 2 and the Sig Sauer P320 X5. So let's knock some of the specs out of the way of these two giant guns here. So the Shadow 2 is going to be 8.53 inches in length versus 8.5 inches on the Sig. The height is 6.18 inches versus 5.8 inches. The barrel length is 4.72 inches versus 5 inches. Now the width, and I'll give you a good look at both of these guys as best I can. The width on the Shadow 2 is 1.34 inches versus 1.6 inches on the Sig. The weight unloaded on the Shadow 2 is 46.91 ounces. It is a tank for sure, and it's 35.6 ounces on the Sig, which is no slouch either. Now the magazine capacity on the Shadow 2, at least out of the box, you're going to get 3 magazines and they're going to be 18 rounders. These are steel, and the nice thing is you can find them. They're pretty plentiful, and they work in other CZs as well. I believe some of the other 75 series. So that's kind of nice, but definitely some options. Now, the Sig is a little bit different. It's going to come with 21 round magazines rather, and 4 of them. And these are compatible with some of the other P320s out there, which is really nice. And it's pretty cool to get 4 21 round magazines. So admittedly, I have to give the leg up to the Sig just a little bit from a magazine perspective. Now, we start to differ just a little bit in some of the features of these firearms. The Shadow 2 is going to be a double-action, single-action firearm, and we'll take a look at the triggers again here in just a little while, versus the striker fire on the Sig Sauer. So definitely some differences. Now, as we start talking about some of the features of these firearms, and I'm going to spend some time with the CZ here for just a little while, because there is a lot going on with this firearm. Now, it is generally speaking pretty stock, with the exception of these lock grips right here. I love the lock grips. These are going to be a thin checkered style grip with the CZ logo. I think they absolutely look fantastic, and check out, I've got a video on the lock grips somewhere in the video library, so if you're curious about that, of course, check that out. But as we start looking at some of the features, from a grip perspective, one of the really nice things, the ergonomics on the Shadow 2 are incredible. They really are. This is a very comfortable gun to hold. It really just molds very nicely with your hand, and for a couple of reasons. First, the checkering on this, and I'll give you a good look at the checkering. There's your back strap right there. And then, of course, your front strap. The checkering is fantastic. I mean, it really gives you a nice purchase on it. And it does come stock with aluminum grips that actually I think are quite nice as well. I just prefer these. I mean, I think these look really cool, and they are very practical for sure. But we've got nice cuts here under the beaver tail as well as under the trigger guard. So it just allows your hand to get up really nice and high on this firearm. And as we move up, again, mention the beaver tail. It's a really nice beaver tail, so it certainly prevents any slide bite or anything like that. But it also, again, just really makes it so your hand can get very high on this. Now, it does have an external safety on it, and you'll notice that this particular safety is actually quite large. Now, it is swappable. You can actually do the safety that's on this side right here on this side, but I chose to do the larger one for a couple of reasons. First, it's really easy to manipulate, but it also, for me, it gives me a place to rest my thumb. So it's kind of nice to have that right there. And then, of course, we have your slide lock, slide release, and it does work as well with both. Now, I find with this safety, I can't wrap my thumb around to get this without changing my grip a little bit. Not a big deal, especially being a range gun, but something to consider. Now, some people say that using your support hand to actuate the slide release, yeah, I suppose that would definitely work, so certainly an option. And then we've got our magazine release, and this is adjustable. You can certainly change this to your liking. Now, it is stock out of the box, and it works incredibly well. I mean, it's easy to get to. It sticks out a little ways on the gun, as you can see right there. And from what I understand, you can swap this out, so it can be a left-handed release as well. There are a couple things you need to do on the inside. I won't get into the details of that. I'm sure there are some videos out there somewhere on it. Now, I said before it's a double action, single action, so of course it is hammer driven and it does have a skeletonized hammer on it. Works really well. I mean, it's easy to grab if you need to, and of course we'll get into the trigger pulls and all that kind of stuff here in just a little bit. Now, the only other thing on this, it does have an accessory rail for lights, chainsaws, lasers, whatever you want. However, I imagine because this is designed really for competition, I don't think many people are going to be hanging things off of this, but again, I suppose if you want that option, you can definitely do it. Now, there's a little bit of serration here, and this one's going to be hard to capture, unfortunately, but a little bit of serration there on the front of the trigger guard, which is great if you're the kind of shooter that puts your finger there. There's a reference. I don't do that, but definitely nice to have that option. Now on the Sig, a lot of features going on here as well. As far as the grip goes, one of the things I really like about this is actually the grip texture, and it's a slightly enhanced grip texture, as you can see from the standard P320. Now this does wrap again all the way around, front, back, and sides. Give you a good look at those right here. And again, I really like them. I mean, it allows for a really good purchase. Now it's a little bit softer than the CZ, but definitely still stays pretty well planted. Now I know some people still go ahead and stipple it, that sort of thing, and that's perfectly fine, but I think this is pretty good out of the box. Now, an interesting thing you'll notice, it actually does have a magwell right here, and it also has a weight on the inside of the grip to help with the balance of the firearm. This magwell is absolutely fantastic. I mean, you really can throw a magazine from almost any angle into the grip right here, and it works really well. So some really nice features there. Now, once again, it features a nice undercut. We'll get a look at that, not only under the trigger guard, but also under the beaver tail, allowing your hand to get up as much as possible. Now, a lot of guys know that SIGs do stand a little bit taller, so there's a little bit more of a bore axis thing if that's of interest to you. I don't really care about that. It doesn't really matter to me very much, but some people do certainly consider it. Now, the magazine release is pretty standard for your P320s, and it is swappable, although not ambidextrous out of the box. And then we do have our slide lock slide release, and this actually is ambidextrous out of the box. So if you are a left-handed shooter, definitely some advantages there, which is great. Now the takedown on both of these firearms certainly are very different, very 1911-ish on the CZ, and I don't generally take these down in these types of videos. And then we've got our standard takedown lever right here on the Sig, very easy to do. One of the interesting things about SIGs, speaking of taking down, a lot of you guys know that the trigger system or trigger module in here is actually completely removable. In other words, you can take your trigger out, which is the serialized part, and you can drop it into a different grip if you want to. Very unique. Not a lot of firearms do that, so definitely some different options there if that's something of interest to you. Oh, a couple of other things. It also has an accessory rail for your lights, lasers, grenade launchers, things like that, as you would expect, even though once again this is tailored more towards competition, but the idea that you can hang something off this, a light or something, if you want to use it for home defense, you definitely could. And once again, we've got some serrations on the front of that trigger guard right there, again, for reference if you decide to use that. All right, let's take a look at the slides for just a moment or two. Now on the CZ, a couple of things. You'll notice it does have front and back serrations, and although the slide on this is very angled, it's not blocky at all, I find that these serrations are fantastic. I mean, they really provide some bite there. I think there's enough to grab a hold of, even though we've got the contours and a little bit less slide going on here, partly because the rails are inside the frame rather than outside the frame. So not a lot of meat up here, but certainly plenty to grab a hold of, and I think it's just a really sharp looking firearm. And then for the sights, we do have a front fiber optic. I chose green rather than red, which is what was on the gun out of the box. And then on the back, it is adjustable for your height, which is really nice. And of course, you could slide this around if you need to inside these dovetails. So I think it makes for a really easy shooting firearm, extremely accurate, and certainly very customizable. And that rear sight does have some serrations on it right there. Hopefully you can see that okay. So a really nice, just kind of mellow slide, if you will. Now on the X5, they do things just a little bit different. Of course, the rails do sit on the outside, so you've got a little bit more slide going on right here, and you'll notice there are front and back serrations. Once again, very usable, and the finish, the nitride finish on this, it definitely is very matte. So, and that's the same for a lot of SIGs out there. It makes it just really easy to grab a hold of, and I like the look of this slide. One other unique thing about this, it does have some lightning cuts up here just to reduce some of the weight, but it does have a bull barrel in it. So it's very interestingly balanced, and I think it works really well. Another interesting thing about this, it actually does have a plate right here that can be removed. You have to remove it from the inside. But if you want to throw a Romeo 1 red dot on it, you can do that. So something that's a little bit of an advantage over the CZ, and a lot of people do like to use their red dots, especially if they're competing with this. But if you choose the iron sights, which is what I've done, we do have a nice front fiber optic there. I'll give you a good look at that. It's a very thin post. I like that quite a bit. And once again, I chose green fiber optic rather than red on it. And then it is a fully adjustable rear sight. Now, one thing I have found with the rear sight, I have to really hike it up basically all the way just to make sure that everything is sighted in, point of aim, point of impact for right around 10 yards, 9 yards, something like that. I find otherwise if this is too low, it really makes the gun shoot low. So this works very well as it stands right here. And that's pretty much all of the features for both of these guys. Let's go ahead and take a look at a little bit of shooting and see how these guys do. Welcome back, guys. Hope you enjoyed that footage at the range. So from a shooting perspective, both of these guns are a ton of fun to shoot. They're a lot of fun because they are larger guns. You can really get your hands on them, but there are definitely some differences between the two. So I want to take a look at both of those, especially the triggers. Now, let's take a look at the CZ here for just a moment or two, and I do have some dummy rounds in the magazine. You guys know I do not like to drop the hammer on an empty firearm right here. So we'll go ahead and put it back into double action, and it's complete double action. So you'll notice there is just a little bit of a lock there. So you're about half cocked, so to speak, but we're gonna go all the way from the bottom. Now, a couple of things about this trigger. It comes in on the double action right around 8.5, almost 9 pounds. But I will say that the trigger on this is exceptionally smooth. So we'll give this just a couple of pulls. And it's just fantastic. I mean, again, it's smooth, it's comfortable. For double action, there's just not a lot of effort going on right there. It's very smooth. Go ahead and pop that out right there. We'll take a look at our reset. And there's your reset. And then we're back out to the start. So there's not a lot going on as far as reset goes. It's a very good reset. We'll take a look at that double action one more time. Again, 8.5 to 9 pounds roughly. So we'll take that pull. And again, there's just not a lot of take up right there. But then we get to our pull, and oh man, it's fantastic. Very smooth indeed. And then our reset right there. Now, single action, we're coming in between 3.5 and 4 pounds. And I'll tell you what, although there's a little bit of take up now, you get to your wall, and there's just no effort. There is no effort whatsoever. The trigger really, truly is absolutely fantastic. There's our reset. Again, we'll do this single action one more time. A little bit of take up, very, very smooth. Right there, 3.5 to 4 pounds roughly, and our reset. So trigger-wise, the CZ is absolutely fantastic. Out of the box, totally stock, no springs or anything like that, no trickery whatsoever. Now the Sig does things just a little bit differently. Now you'll notice that this has a flat trigger, and again, totally bone stock, and this is a post-recall trigger, just to remind you. But it does it just a little bit differently. So take-up-wise, we do have a tiny bit of take-up, but not a lot, and it comes to a very defined wall. And then we've got our break right there. And the break is okay. You know, I've always said that Sig Sauer P320s always have a little bit of a thud. They're not as crisp as I would like for them to be, although they definitely do the job. And then our reset is right there. And we do have some travel to get to the reset, although it is certainly manageable. There's not a whole lot. So once again, our take up, we get to our wall, and there's our break. And then our reset right there. I shouldn't have been talking. I'll do that one more time for you here. Right there in our reset. I'd say the trigger is very good, and you guys probably know I've got the X Carry and the X VTAC, and each trigger system is just a little bit different. Although I like the VTAC, I think, the most, this would be a pretty close second. The X Carry has probably my least favorite feel of trigger. Now again, I'm leaving room to do some Apex parts in this at some point in time, but it's been fun to really experience this in stock form again. Now, one thing about the P320s I've noticed, the trigger has a little bit of a break-in period, about 250 rounds, because it's a little bit rough at first, and especially that reset actually takes a little bit of time to get back, so it's not as smooth. So what I recommend people do is just go ahead, run to the range, get some rounds through this, and then take it apart, and actually take the trigger spring apart, take the trigger bar out, and really clean it up and re-grease it and put it back together. And you'll find that they actually run really well after that. So you guys probably saw the shooting footage. Now, admittedly, I don't shoot the X5 nearly as well as I do the CZ on most days. We'll get to that here in just a moment. But that was actually the break-in on this new trigger that you saw for the most part. And so there was a little bit of a struggle in there, partly because just getting used to this trigger, because I've been spending so much time with the X VTAC and the X Carry, so getting back into this, but still a lot of fun to shoot. All right, so here comes the challenging part, announcing a winner. And I've said many times, and I've said it on our Wednesday night chats with Big Johnson Guns and Gear and 1776 or Bust. Be sure to join us on those. That these videos, these If I Could Only Have ones, are extremely challenging. Now, admittedly, some are a little bit easier than others, but there are some that are very challenging because, first, again, I own both of these firearms, and I love shooting both of them. So it's tough to do that challenge to myself to really pick a winner. But I've got to do it. Now, I've spent a lot of time with SIGs over the last, probably 6 or 8 months with a variety of different firearms, and they are a lot of fun. I'm a big believer in Sig Sauer. Even though they've had some missteps over the last couple of years, I still by and large think they make good quality guns. So I've had a good experience with them, and the X5 is no slouch. I mean, it's kind of a big gun. The grip is a little bit bigger, so if you've got smaller hands, it might be a little bit unwieldy perhaps. But once you dial it in and you really start shooting it, it is a lot of fun to shoot. It's very well balanced. It's got enough heft to it at around 36 ounces or so. It's just a lot of fun, and having 4 21 round magazines that come with it and that big mag well, I mean, it really is fully featured. Throw that red dot on there and you're good to go. So it's kind of the kitchen sink in a firearm as competition firearms go. Now, some of you guys are going to say, well, it doesn't fit in every box. I get that. I understand. But the intention, I think, for this gun certainly is for competition of various sorts. So it's a lot of fun, and I definitely recommend checking out the X series, especially the X5. But when we get to the CZ Shadow 2, things change just a little bit, and I know some people are already making comments if you haven't left yet. But the CZ is just, it's a different firearm altogether. First, it's a tank. I mean, it is a heavy gun at 46, almost 47 ounces, but the ergonomics are incredible. And this is the type of gun, when you go and shoot it, it just makes you look like a better shooter than you probably deserve, or at least it does for me. And that's part of the appeal for this. I mean, it's really fun to be able to go to the range and shoot a gun and feel really good about your shooting, rather than doing a whole lot of work on it. And there's just not a lot of work when you have to shoot a gun like this. And that is really cool. But it also, I think, is a beautiful firearm. I mean, I think CZ just did a really good job putting this together and making a good looking firearm, and a pleasure to shoot, and it's a pleasure to own. Now it's a little bit more expensive, coming in around $1,200 or so. You can find it for a little bit less than that, versus $800 to $900 on this Sig. Now both are a little bit more expensive, of course, than other firearms out there, but when you get to full featured firearms like these guys, I think it's worth it. I mean, that's just my opinion, of course. So again, these things are always a challenge to make, but if I was to pick a winner, if I could only have one, I will admit I would go with the CZ Shadow 2. It just is a top of the line firearm in my opinion, although the Sig is no slouch. So guys, I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say about this. If you agree or disagree, I'm always looking forward to those, so be sure to sound off down below. Once again, thanks so much for joining me, and I will see you next time.